Right. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Lamont, and welcome to NYO Canada Online Workshops. Our YouTube live chat is open, and we will be fielding questions throughout the presentation. So please feel free to post any comments, questions, and of course, chat amongst each other. Today's presenter was a flautist with the OSM for 30 years, is an NYO alum, and currently a mental performance coach on faculty at McGill University. Please welcome Carolyn Christie.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk today about the losses and changes that are very specific to you music students due to COVID-19. And a lot of this talk, I'm going to try to help you separate the things you can control from the things you cannot and brainstorm some solutions for ways you can control them. And I want to start by saying that I think there are four things that are essential for any successful performance. There are two that you can control and two that you cannot. The two that you can control are the preparation, the thoroughness of your preparation on the instrument. The other thing is your mental concentration and focus under pressure that you can control with some training. And then there are two things you cannot control. One is your talent. You all have talent or you wouldn't have won places in NYO. And the other thing is your luck. COVID-19, bad luck, not your fault. Can't control it. It's there. So some other, this is what we're going to be speaking about today. Some other goals I have for today is to try to help you recognize areas in which you're feeling sadness or frustration because of this unbelievable situation you're in, so that you can then separate those situations and deal with them individually, consciously. Because sometimes we just have overwhelming feelings of sadness and frustration or anger because there's so many little things that are getting in the way of our art right now. And the last thing is I want to try to help you find solutions for some of the losses and changes that you're suffering right now. And one of the prime things you can do to find solutions is to tune into the other presentations at NYO. My colleagues and I are all on the same wavelength for this. We have different ways of approaching these questions. And in anything in music, in anything in mental skills and focus, the answers are individual. So one presenter might not quite click with you, but another one might. So I really encourage you to listen to everything that NYO is offering. So I'm going to start with the obvious losses that you as performers are suffering. And the first obvious loss is the NYO season. The delightful thing I've heard is that your places will be saved for next season. And that's so wonderful. I'm so delighted. It's similar to the Olympics for many Canadian teams. Athletes who have worked so hard to win a spot, just like you have with your video auditions, are being saved their places for many Canadian sports in 2021. Of course, you've lost performances. Many of you had juries, live juries you were going to play that you prepared so hard for. Many of you were going to graduate, either undergraduate or graduate, or perhaps even doctoral this year. So not only did you miss playing your recitals, which are the pinnacle of your work in undergraduate or graduate studies, but you've missed the ceremonies, you've missed the live ceremonies. And these are big things. We cannot replace them, unfortunately. Another thing is you've missed performing in ensembles. I know from my work as a flute teacher at McGill, we gave, the kids won their spots by audition, but we seated some of the strongest players in the final concert, and that was to be the pinnacle of their orchestral career at McGill, and then the concert was canceled. I want to express that I feel that you have the right to feel this loss. You have the right to feel bad about it. Some people will say that, and it's true, they're very varying degrees of loss. Someone who has lost a child or a grandparent to the virus, that's an extreme degree of loss. But I recognize as a performer myself, as a mental skills coach, and as a teacher, that the loss of a jury or graduation recital or the graduation ceremony, it's a true loss. So I want you to feel the right to feel lousy about this. It would be bizarre if you didn't. So we're not trying to say that uh, a more serious degree of loss is not more important. It's different. Your losses are real. Another huge loss that I think orchestral musicians, all musicians feel, is the connection with other people. Connection with your mentors, your teachers, conductors, coaches, and also with your colleagues. This is something we cannot replace right now. I know many of my colleagues, I retired from the OSM a few years ago, but many of my colleagues are making wonderful videos, orchestral videos using click tracks. And many people have commented that they're wonderful and inspiring. But I can tell you, I've spoken with a few of my colleagues who have made these videos, and two of them told me they broke down crying trying to record the video because they missed that connection with their colleagues. So this is a real loss that we cannot replace in person. But of course, like these FaceTime and Zoom or whatever connections, we can do something with it. And I encourage you to do that. Probably you've already set up Facebook groups with your sections. I encourage you to go to merge the sections as well, flutes with oboes, with the brass, whatever, uh, to at least reestablish even the connections when you were not in the same room. They're so important to us. One thing you can also do for your connections is to start to think about the fall or perhaps even the winter season. What can you plan that you can do together, assuming that this whole thing is better by the winter, or if we're lucky by the fall? What groups could you look forward to meeting with? Perhaps in your area, perhaps you can find out now through NYO who lives in your area that you could actually get together with from a respectable difference. The connection with peers and with concerts, I have to say I am absolutely convinced that live music is going to come back, although it's not going to come back in the short term. And for those of you who have recently graduated and you're out there looking for work, I am absolutely sure live performance will come back. As a career performer and a career, like a lifetime audience member, I know that live music is different than even the best top level performance that you can get online. Many of my colleagues have been talking about what happened during the Spanish flu epidemic after the First World War. That same thing as now for musicians. Everything was shut down, no gatherings. People were terrified. But when the flu epidemic was over, people flocked back to the concert hall because they missed that live experience. So I truly believe that this is going to come back for you. It just unfortunately may not be as soon as you want it to be. The third thing in the area of loss are illnesses that are caused by COVID. And this is real for all of us. You might be worried about grandparents. You might be worried about peers. I've had several colleagues who have contracted the virus. All have recovered, I'm delighted to say. But you may be concerned about vulnerable family members. And some of you may have unfortunately already experienced loss in this area at this time. So let's separate with these issues what you can control and what you cannot. You cannot control the virus or what it's done to other people. You cannot control the situation of other people, but you can control your own safety measures. I know this is obvious to you. You can wash your hands and do all that other stuff and be very careful about the gatherings. But more than that, you can start to do some outreach for people for whom you are concerned. Uh, Write a snail mail letter. How many of you ever done that? Send it to grandparents, send it to aunts and uncles across the country. This kind of outreach is different than a FaceTime call. It's empowering for the sender and it's fantastic for the receiver. So that is a concrete thing that you can do if you're worried about people. You can also reach out for help yourself. NYO has some terrific resources if you need some help yourself because of your concern. And for yourselves as well, I encourage you to exercise great self-compassion right now. Times are hard. They're so different for us right now, and feeling crummy about it is very normal. So feel compassion for yourself in this area. Does anybody have any comment they would like to make at this point about outreach they've done for peers or family members? Write it in the chat line if you've done something unusual. Have you played duets with yourself? Have you recorded? Maybe somebody can type in the app. I can't remember what it is, where you record and then play back with yourself. That it's not like having a peer in the same room, but it's empowering nonetheless. So as I speak about change, uh, any comments that you have about things you've done, things that work, things that haven't worked, please write them in the chat line. And any questions at any point as well. So change is a big one. Enormous changes that we don't have control over. One major change I know every single one of my students is living with, and many of my peers as well, is control over their living situation. Even me, my husband is living in the States right now. I'm living in Montreal, and we have no control over that due to the border closure. So, oh, this is wonderful, Alex. You've written a snail mail to your partner with a drawing. That's terrific. And you know something great about snail mail that the younger generation doesn't realize? You're going to have that forever. Emails are just so ephemeral. I still have letters. Yeah, I'm old. From the 1970s that my dad wrote me when I worked in the Edmonton Symphony in my first job. I've kept those forever because they're so wonderfully meaningful. Oh, oh, that's terrific, Leo. Wonderful. And you know, this outreach with your dad, that's terrific. What does your dad play, Jessica? What do you play and what does your dad play? Because I can't remember everybody. When you have time, write it in. Anyway, back to the living situations. Living situation on many of my students had roommates who are now gone and they're living alone, and this can create quite a sense of loneliness. This is where they reach out to others in their class and they try to get together, you know, for coffee outside, that sort of thing. Loneliness can also be a big issue if you're living in your parents' basement again and you haven't been at home for 5 years. It's a whole different situation not being around your colleagues. Living situation, and maybe Gabe has spoken about this, we were talking about this last week. Living situation can also have a big impact on your practice situation. And my goodness, the practice situation for the percussionists, maybe pianists, people with no access to instruments or loud instruments, it can be a real deal. Other people are working from home now. I know in my neighborhood, there are many kids out playing in the streets, and it's terrific. But if people are trying to work at home, it can be quite a challenge. And I know with practicing my flute on tours, there were many times in hotels when I had knocks on the door, please stop practicing, that kind of thing. So brainstorming, I'll give you a couple of suggestions, and maybe you can type in your own suggestions as well. One main thing is to make sure that your neighbors, your family, if you're living with, can't think in English, kolak, roommates, um, people who are not musicians don't understand that practice is our work. And that's a really important thing for people to understand. I've had several clients in my private mental skills practice who have had great difficulty living at home because their families don't always understand that practice is our work. And that can be that's a very important conversation to have. Uh, they often families understand studying, but they don't understand practicing. The obvious things about making a workplace for yourself where you feel free to practice is to be very empathetic for others and their needs. If there's a baby, if there's an older person who has to sleep, I'm one of those, find out what their habits are and show your willingness to work around this. Making a schedule with the other people with whom you live or with your neighbors if you're in an apartment can be very, very helpful. We're going to, Lorna McGee and I will be doing an interview tomorrow, and we will probably be speaking more in depth about motivation. But motivation in this area, I want to get into a little bit. Motivation for others to understand that you need to practice. The first thing was to explain that it's an essential part of your life because it's your work, to understand your situation as artists. And then making deals with other people with empathy for their situation, then they're much more likely to have understanding and empathy for yours. And you can also offer rewards. This is like the lowest thing on the motivational scale, but sometimes it's helpful. You know, if you let me practice my trumpet, if you understand about my trumpet practicing for 2 or 3 hours, I'll babysit your baby for an hour. You know, that kind of trade can be very helpful. So that's a reward system for motivation for others to accept your predicament. And in this case, too, if anybody's had to change their practice habits because of the living situation, because of a block to actually being able to practice, please add it in the chat line. Now, another major loss of control for music students and young pros is, of course, financial insecurity. You may be losing big scholarships that you counted on for NYO. You might be new in the workforce, all set to audition, or you might still, we occasionally get at NYO, we get performers who were playing professionally in orchestras. The financial insecurity, of course, you're probably aware of the government programs that are available. I'm pretty sure if you're not, NYO would fill you in. And it's a time to call in your favors, too. Maybe you graduated with debt and you were all set to do a gig and freelance. If you're having trouble paying the rent, reach out to that grandparent, that aunt, that uncle, for an interest-free loan. If it's the time to ask, nobody minds if you ask. Well, let me rephrase that. The type of person you would ask wouldn't mind. Motivation to practice, that's a huge one. First of all, be patient. I know I've seen peers, my colleagues, some of my colleagues are having a great deal of difficulty practicing right now, pros. Some of my colleagues find motivation by challenging themselves to post like one etude a day or a solo sonata a week or something like that. And that is motivating, very motivating for them. It may not be for you. 100 days of practice, wonderful. So that that could be very useful for some people to feel like, okay, I'm going to challenge myself to practice this amount. For some other people, because this is highly individual, that might be overwhelming and not quite workable. So the thing is to find out your learning style, your motivational style, what will work for you. Experiment with your schedules. Many of my flute students, like for flute, usually the optimal practice day is 3.5 to 4 hours, in my opinion. And I have students I have never in my life had to motivate or try to help them find motivation to practice. And many of my students just can't get into it. Um, so I've suggested this experimenting with schedules. If you look at a 4-hour block and you just think, I can't do that, practice for 5 minutes. If you can focus for 5 minutes, put your instrument down, and then come back for another 5 minutes. It sounds small, but it can add up. Inspiration. I'm going to get into inspiration a little bit more at the end in this of this talk. Self-bribery. Again, that's the lowest on the scale of motivation. Rewards, self-bribery. What could you bribe yourself with? Again, I might get into this with Lorna tomorrow. In my life as an orchestra musician in Montreal, we would have a minimum of 2 programs a week, sometimes as much as 5 in the summer. And there was a lot of music I didn't like. It wasn't my job to like it. It was my job to play it. So I had to find motivation to practice it. And I found, if I really didn't like the music, I found self-bribery a way to get myself in the practice room. Actually, I'll go into the other motivational levels as well now, since I've got you all here. So the lowest level of motivation is if you have to bribe yourself, reward yourself. So if I had a piece of contemporary music I didn't like, I knew would take me 40 hours to learn and I would play it once, I really didn't want to learn this stuff. So in order to get myself to practice, I would bribe myself. And for me, it was usually a 10-minute segment. I would practice 10 minutes and then eat a piece of chocolate cake, call my sister-in-law, take a walk or whatever. But I knew I couldn't just practice 10 minutes and get the work done. I would have to add to the 10 minutes that I was practicing. I would also intersperse the music I didn't want to practice with music I really wanted to practice. Again, self-bribery, but with a view of getting everything done. Now, higher on the motivational scale is if you value the task that you're doing. So valuing the task for a musician, well, for me in that instance, for example, I valued the task of learning the music because it was my job. I valued my job. I valued my holding up my end of the deal for my colleagues, because an orchestra only works if 100 out of 100 people learn the music well. I valued the task of honoring the composer's work, whether I liked it or not. Taste is so ephemeral in music. It's so subjective. The person beside me might have loved the music and I didn't, but who cares? I had to learn it. But I valued learning it. I valued the task. So you go from self-rewards or bribery to valuing the task. And as you practice, you sound better, right? And this can get you in the practice room now too. Just knowing if you make that 5-minute start, you're going to sound better. So if you're practicing a bit and you sound better, you can reach the top of motivation, which is, it's called the intrinsic joy of doing something. Intrinsic joy is that deep-seated love of doing what you're doing. That the example I use so often with my flute students For us, it's Prokofiev's Sonata. Everybody wants to play it. It's one of the best works written for the flute. But you're not always ready, first year undergraduate or second year undergraduate, to really play this piece. So I will often say, no, wait. And when I get to third year or fourth year with a student, or sometimes masters, I'll say, okay, now you can play the Prokofiev. So the student needs no motivation to play this piece. They can't wait to play it. And I'm sure every one of you has that feeling for some piece you've played. I'd actually be interested in you just saying your instrument and any pieces that you just get incredible joy out of playing. This inspiration is all tied up with this too. So if you think of motivating yourself to practice, again, I'll recap. Be patient. It's different for everybody. It can be very difficult without a set performance goal. That's another thing you can do, actually, is set yourself a performance goal. Go from getting yourself in the practice room for very small units, if you're ready to do it, 5 minutes at a time, 10 minutes at a time. Think very consciously about how you value practice, how you value your art, how you value sounding good on the instrument, which will, and that is the valuing the task of what you're doing. And then the more you practice, the better you sound, the more you get into that intrinsic joy where you're sounding hot and you really want to practice. So recognize those levels. When you have a day when you feel like, what's the point? Why am I doing this? Yeah, Katrina, starting is absolutely the hardest part. Start for 5 minutes. If there's anybody who can't do 5 minutes, do 2 minutes. And start with something you want to play. One of my colleagues said he's just playing stuff for fun. One of my colleagues in the OSM is getting him in the practice room, and he's playing. Like, we're all such nerds in the flute section in Montreal. We would play studies for fun. You know, what can I say? Maybe some of you do that. On tour, we would always be practicing studies for fun. So it doesn't have to be daftness and coy. It can be a study. Practice something that you love to play. And many of my students have found their sound by practicing even folk tunes. Folk tunes from their heritage, things their parents might have sung to them as children. This can unearth joy in us. And certainly, I think for almost all of you, you found joy in your playing at some time in your life. So we're looking for that joy, but it's not going to come for everybody right away. So make yourself a goal. I'm going to practice tomorrow. Whenever the best time for you is. For me, it would be 11 in the morning. Some people, it's 11 at night if it works with your roommates. Think of the best time for you. Think of a piece you'd love to play and just play it for a minute, 2 minutes. Put it away. Then try something else later and just keep adding to this. If you're out of shape, this will gradually get you back in shape. Okay, now I want to get into one of the big issues. Why bother? Why bother playing the instrument right now? And some of my clients have worked with me on this. These are the big questions. Why should I bother playing? As artists, as performers, many of us need to play. We need to express ourselves. I always got great joy out of playing the flute just by hearing the sound. I love the sound. I loved most playing in a group. Can't do it right now. I'm retired anyway. I can't do it right now, but I love the sound of playing. Socially, and this is why I'm sure live music is going to come back, is people need the arts. It might sound cheesy, but there's a lot of truth to cheesy things. And humans need the arts. They need the arts for inspiration. I have a couple of journalist friends who mentioned that they've noticed, obviously on Facebook, that people not in the arts are flocking to the arts online to find a sense of solace and calm in this mess. The arts feed our souls. And the arts will always be around, although they will be in a different form, at least in the short term. One thing that Dominique Labelle is a wonderful voice professor at McGill, and she said in a webinar last week that I've lost my train of thought here. Oh yes, that musicians have always had to be adaptable. And this is true for 99.9% of music students. You go through your university or conservatory career, you go out into the world, and things do not always happen the way you dreamed they would for almost everybody. So we have to be adaptable, and we are very adaptable. Oh, and something I forgot to mention, although I know you're getting a seminar, maybe you have already, for the financial insecurity, and this goes to the adaptability, is to start teaching online for to earn some money. As a flute teacher, I can tell you I learned more about my own playing from starting to teach younger kids than anything else, because kids ask you questions, and if you're a natural player like I was, you haven't thought about the answers, and it makes you reflect on the answers, and then this can inspire your own practicing. So anyway, that's an example of adaptability. Maybe you didn't expect to start teaching now, but if you're in NYO, there's something you can teach to somebody younger who doesn't have your expertise. Do not think that you're not ready to teach. Maybe you're not ready to teach at university, but maybe there's an 8-year-old who's dying to play the violin or the cello or the flute or whatever. Now is the time to try to create an online studio. In most places in Canada, those kids are not in school and their parents are looking for something for them to do. So I'm sure somebody's going to give a webinar, if they haven't already, on starting an online studio. This is an example of being adapted, being very able to adapt. I want to speak a little bit now, and this will relate to motivation to practice as well, about the role of inspiration. We need inspiration in our lives as humans to get through the day. Those doctors and nurses and frontline workers, they need to be calm. They need to be inspired to get back out and do what they're doing. As performers, like the big questions hit you even when you're a pro playing in an orchestra, like, what's the point of what I'm doing? I think almost all of us face this. We play because we love to play, but then you ask yourself, is there a point when the world is upside down? I think absolutely yes, there is a point, because we keep these people sane. We keep the doctors sane. We keep the nurses sane. As I said before, my journalist friends noticed how much people are looking for the arts on the internet now, and they will be looking for them live later. So where do you find your hope? Where do you find your inspiration? For hope and inspiration in your lives, some people find this hope and inspiration in organized religion, which is terrific. Some people find their inspiration in nature, some in literature, and certainly for us, it's in music. If I want to feel inspired, if I'm looking for hope, I'll listen to Beethoven's Sixth. I mean, the Pastoral has so much hope in it, so much joy. There are other areas I find inspiration too, and this will speak to getting myself in the practice room. I I was not the type of flutist who listened to other flutists for inspiration if I didn't feel like practicing. Uh, I would look like I'm a huge country music fan, believe it or not. I would listen to Dolly Parton. I would listen to the Dixie Chicks. Katie Lang is one of my favorite singers of all time. If you're looking for inspiration, um, she sang, her big tune now is Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. She sang that in a concert for benefit of the Australian fires some months ago. I challenge you to listen to that performance. And this is a work she's probably sung 5,000 times, if not more. Watch this singer get into the zone, find her inner inspiration for her performance, and then sing. Try to use that inspiration yourself. Her presentation, her art, the words of the song, try to use that for your inspiration. Maria Callas was another person, a singer. I hope you all know who she was. If you don't, Google her. Very different sort of a vocal quality than we're used to now. Deeply inspiring to me. So my point here is that inspiration in music is very personal. If you like to listen to a flute player for inspiration, if you're a flute player, listen to it. Try to recognize what inspires you to get into the room and play. Other areas, and we touched on these before, for inspiration can be doing outreach yourself for joy. Somebody mentioned writing letters with pictures in them to a partner. This is terrific. This sort of outreach can help us find joy and inspiration in a situation. Honestly, teaching can too. I can say as a career teacher, I love to teach. I couldn't wait to teach. And it would inspire me to teach students as much as I hope on occasion I inspired my own students. It's a two-way street with a great student. Uh, think outside the box. Is anybody writing letters to retirement homes? Maybe offering live streamed videos? I can tell you when you get older, there's nothing you'd like to see more than younger people of your age doing something they love to do. Do a 5-minute video, offer it to a retirement home. Do a live chat. Maybe imagine like if you can prepare a 5-minute piece of something live streamed to a retirement home with a chat line monitored at the home for questions. This sort of outreach is not only great for the business, it's great for the art, and the outreach effect on you as the giver can be incredibly inspiring. And one last thing I'd like to mention is that with all this mess we're in right now, we're in kind of what I've heard termed as a vigilance mode. Every time I go out the door, I'm in a vigilance mode. Every time I get groceries delivered and I have to wipe everything down, I'm in vigilance mode. I strongly suggest to all of you that you find a set time every day to get out of this mode. And this includes also feeling guilty, which I hope you don't, about not practicing, about feeling sad that you're not at NYO right now. We need to find ways to get out of this mode. Watch Netflix, or you know what I mean. Read a book, that kind of stuff. Other people come to us to get out of the vigilance mode. Like I said with my comment about sending videos to retirement homes, your sending the video will get them out of vigilance mode. It will get them to think about something else for a minute. So think about yourselves in this situation. How can you get out of this being ready for a bomb to drop feeling? Whatever works for you, as long as it's legal. Do it what brings you joy. Games night. I know my own children who are in their 30s are doing games nights online with their friends and colleagues. And they're wonderful and goofy, and they get your mind off this. So look for ways to get out of this vigilance mode. Now, I have to say it's very odd to give a lecture and not see anybody's faces. And I'm going to reflect on this and comment tomorrow about this, because this is kind of what you're doing when you're making an NYO video, isn't it? When you're making an audition video, you're putting your heart out there, you're putting your knowledge and your expertise out there, but you see no reaction whatsoever. So I'm going to think about this a little bit and comment tomorrow about tools I've used in order to give you the best I possibly can in this situation. What I usually do when I do these webinars, or whatever you want to call them, is I can see the crowd, I can see the audience, and usually I can read people's body language to see if they have any questions or if they don't understand anything I've spoken about. And I can't do that right now. So I'd like to take a minute or two, perhaps now, for you to write in questions or comments. Don't feel you have to, but if you have any questions or comments that you want to pose right now, please do. If you have questions or comments that you feel you might not want to identify yourself, because I know you're identified right now if you ask these questions, then I encourage Chris, it's fine for you to give out my email, my private email address. You can pose these questions to me privately, and I'll be very happy to answer you. Just identify yourself as a member of NYO. So I hope you found this helpful. If there's anything you would like me to expand on or speak about more, please put it in the chat line or privately. Any questions? Please ask them now.
Give it a few more seconds here, Carolyn.
And certainly any comments about things you've done that have been helpful or challenges you're having.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Carolyn. I personally think I needed this talk today, and I'm really looking forward to you and Lorna's workshop tomorrow. So thank you again so much.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you, Chris, for setting this up.
Of course. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Oh, Carolyn, I'm actually going to pull a quick reverse.
Yeah, sure.
We got one question we just caught right at the end. Jessica Tovey.
Okay, Jessica, what do you play? Tell me which instrument you have.
I can tell you, Carolyn. Jessica Tovey is a violinist. Her father is Bromwell Tovey.
Oh, okay. Hi, Jessica. Should have figured that out. Boy, I would have to know what the space is like, for one thing. Efficient practice space. Could you expand on the question a little bit? I want to understand it. It's a tough one, Jessica. It would depend on the setup of your room. Optimally, it's nice to get out of your living space to practice, but sometimes we just can't. I know I've set up a workspace for videos like this that is separate from where I usually do my practice, because this is a different mindset for me. If you can't, I guess it's all the usual stuff. See if you can get, if the room is totally dead, see if you can do anything with the surfaces to see if you can get a bit of a ring. That can be a real problem if you have to practice in a bedroom, because it can make, if your sound is dead, sometimes you want to jump off a bridge. I have on occasion had this problem on tour in small hotel rooms. And on occasion, if the room is dead, I've practiced a little bit in a bathroom, although that's easier with a flute than with a violin. I don't know if that's a helpful answer, Jessica. Any other questions about motivation? Any comments about not feeling like practicing? Any comments on what you're doing to practice? Maybe some ideas I haven't mentioned. It's great to share ideas.
Okay.
So
That may be the end.
And email me privately if you have any private questions. I totally encourage you to do that. I'll answer every question I get.
Amazing. Thank you again, Carolyn, and thank you everyone for tuning in.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, everybody. Bye.